Darkness. Pitch darkness so inky black that it felt like we had been locked inside some ancient, subterranean tomb. The only sounds were the ragged breaths of my terrified friends and the muffled, furious howls of the creature outside. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear as I crouched on the cold, concrete floor of the bunker, listening as the creature's shrieks grew louder and louder. Oh God, I heard Noah whisper in the dark, his voice breaking with fear. It's coming. The thick, steel door shook as something slammed into it from the outside. Terror stabbed through my guts, the sound echoing around the stone walls of the bunker until it felt as if it were rattling my skull. Oh Jesus, please no, God, please help us. Tears of raw panic filled my eyes, my trembling hands reaching for the small pen knife in my pocket. It won't do a thing. It won't do a goddamn thing, I thought to myself. It's going to break in here and rip my arm from its sockets before I can even try to stab this freaking monster. I'll bleed to death, watching it tearing my best friends inside out, and there's nothing I can do. Not a freaking thing I can do. I fumbled for the blade in the darkness, ready for that hideous thing to smash through the door, ready to die trying. But nothing came. Whatever that thing was, it stopped trying to force its way inside. We heard its howls grow quieter and quieter as we waited terrified in the darkness, waiting to die. After what seemed like an hour of us remaining still as statues in the dark silence of the bunker, a single torch beam shot out from the direction of Morgan and his backpack, pointing squarely at the bunker steel door. Instinctually, I began to rummage through my own pack, folding away the pen knife and searching for the small LED torch I had packed. Noah, however, did not rush to retrieve a torch. His first thought was that the burner cell phone he'd brought for an emergency, a small but reliable piece of technology that had a battery, could be used at least a week without needing to be recharged. Oh, thank God, I remember saying, a warm feeling of hope spreading through my chest. Freaking concrete is blocking the signal, Noah cursed. But first chance we get, I'm calling for rescue. We're going to be fine. Everything's going to be just fine.
Rucksacks off, boys.
Morgan hissed.
Grab your torches, phones, food, and first aid kits. Everything else we can leave behind.
He was running on pure adrenaline. Millennia-old survival instincts kicking in hard. We need to move and we need to move fast. Wait, what? Noah reacted as if Morgan had completely lost his mind. And go back out there? Are you goddamn serious right now?
No, I don't mean go back out there.
Morgan barked in reply.
I'm saying there has to be another way out of here. There must be.
And what if there isn't? That thing is probably out there waiting for us. I'm not going back out there. Nuh-uh. F that. No goddamn way. Noah and Morgan continued to argue back and forth as I shined my torch around the darkened room. The walls were evidently once painted white, the color now faded to an almost sickly pale yellow. Filing cabinets sat rusting next to large, dated computer equipment, a thick layer of dust having settled everything around us. The place reminded me of the reception area in a doctor's office. What is this place? I asked out loud as Noah and Morgan ceased their bickering, peering around as torch beams scanned the environment for clues. Without a word, we each rose to our feet, tossing our heavy rucksacks into a cobweb-infested corner before we began to explore the abandoned bunker.
Stay together,
Morgan whispered, leading the three of us down a long, dark corridor. We silently stopped at the first half-open doorway we came to, exchanging nervous looks as we prepared to head inside. Slowly, Morgan pushed on the clammy, rotten wood and shone his torch into the filthy room. Row upon row of hospital beds lined the small, dank interior. All were empty and unmade, black mold festering on the damp mattresses, all except one. On this bed in the very far corner of the room, a motionless shape was covered by a grimy, once white sheet. Morgan began to approach it. "Morgan!" Noah hissed, his fear tinged with frustration. "What the hell are you doing, man?" Morgan didn't listen, ignoring the questions as his footsteps were punctuated by the crunch of dust and old masonry. We simply watched, our torch beams flickering around, illuminating clumps of old cobwebs and the carcasses of decaying vermin. He took hold of the sheet, slowly dragging it away to reveal a time-worn, gore-encrusted skeleton. A faint gasp echoed around the room as we stared, awestruck, at the sight of the cadaver. The bones, a muddy brown as mold feasted on what little remained. Then the smell hit us. Not as putrid as an actual rotting body, but pungent nonetheless. "Jesus!" Noah exclaimed, covering his mouth and nose with the sleeve of his jacket. "Get away from that, dude, it freaking reeks!" But again, Morgan just ignored him, studying the bones of the corpse intently under his torch beam. I began to approach the occupied bed as well, my eyes locked onto something hideously strange about the skeleton structure. The skull, ribs, and pelvis bones all displaying some kind of abnormal growth. Lumps of what looked like bubbling calcium deposits sprouted painfully from the skeleton itself, as if undergoing some kind of mutation. "Are you seeing this?" I whispered in Morgan's direction, shining my torch onto the most affected areas.
I've never seen anything like this before.
Morgan remarked in disbelief.
It almost looks like the initial phases of Proteus syndrome, but no one has ever just developed the disease later in life. It's a birth defect, although a variety of elephantiasis can be transmitted to the body via parasitic worms.
"Parasitic worms? Then get the hell away from that thing, dude," Noah exclaimed, his voice tinged with disgust. "Jesus, who cares what it is? Guys, we need to get the heck out of here, and we need to do it now." "He's right, Morgan. Let's get out of here," I said. But Morgan's eyes were still fixed on the skeleton. I had to reach across the bed and take hold of his arm to get his attention. "Morgan."
Okay, we're going.
We retreated from the room, slowly edging out into the corridor again as our torch beams preceded our every movement. I kept looking back towards the blackened skeleton, half expecting it to slowly sit up with its neck bones crunching as it turned. But it didn't. Without a word, we left the unburied corpse to lie for God knows how much longer, lost to the world. The corridor had a few more rooms leading off from it, just administrative offices as far as we could tell, with old computer equipment and files piled high on the desk. Not one yielded us any form of escape. However, one thing I did notice was the huge amount of shredded paper that was in the process of rotting into mush. It was piled on the floors, overflowing from dusty trash cans. Whatever information this facility had collected, an effort was certainly made to destroy it. We kept going, feeling like dead men walking the Green Mile. Our torch beams quickly united at the end of the corridor, each illuminating a pair of hospital-style double doors that blocked our path. On the left-hand push panel was single human handprint. It was darkened with age, dried and flaking, but we all knew that it was blood. With trepidation, we inched closer and closer to the door with no bloody handprint. The light of our torches fixed to the dreadful omen as we reluctantly crept towards it. Not one of us spoke, too afraid of what might be behind the door, afraid it might hear us. It was Morgan who finally placed a shaking palm on it before beginning to push. What greeted us on the other side turned my blood to ice. Twisted, broken shapes covered the floor of the next corridor along. Not a single inch of the tiled floor was visible to us, just a mass of jutting angles covered in fabric. When I focused my eyes on the bright torch beams in the darkness, I began to understand what they were. They were bodies. A carpet of dead bodies, all wearing the same distinctive camouflage pattern. The smell of rot hit us almost as soon as we passed through the double doors. A stench of decay so ripe that I had to stop myself from gagging. Our torchlight crept over the mass of bodies, catching where bone ripped through uniform. There were so many bullets that had been fired that the brass shell casings twinkled in our torch beams. The soldiers' weapons were utterly destroyed, broken pieces of rifles laying among the corpses. The tough sheet metal cleaved in two by some ungodly force. What the hell happened here? I whispered to myself, covering my nostrils with my sleeve to keep the toxic stink at bay.
They were trying to kill it. They were trying to kill it and it slaughtered them.
The sea of skeletal corpses was the only thing separating us from another door at the end of the corridor. A single threshold, our only perceived means of escape. Morgan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come, then took a single step onto the mass of bodies. With a sickening crunch, he shifted his weight, finding a foothold among the forest of bones. He took another step, almost losing his balance among the carnage as he began to advance slowly down the corridor. We followed, leaning on the walls for balance as we edged through the piles of butchery. I tried not to look down. I tried not to acknowledge that skeletons of men who died unnatural deaths were being ground to bone meal beneath my boots. Yet, as I tried to set my foot down on one particularly raggedy patch of human remains, my boot sank through the ribcage of one unfortunate soul, causing me to slip and crash into the festering debris below with a nauseating crack. I remember my hand sinking into the flesh soup that congealed on the tiled floor. The gluttonous remains of liquefied flesh and organs that felt like a cold jelly on my palms. I panicked, rolling around among the bodies. If a jagged piece of bone had cut me open, if even a smidgen of decaying human slime that reeked beneath me had gotten into a fresh womb, I would be doomed. Shit. Help! Help! Morgan reacted instantly, scrambling back among the bodies, leaning against a wall as he held a hand out to me. I was covered in it, rotten slime oozing down the sleeves of my jacket. The stench was unbearable. I gagged as I pulled it off from me, flailing desperately to free my arms from the sleeves. When I finally did, I followed Morgan and Noah along the edge of the corridor, driving myself forward with all the will I could muster. When we had at least cleared the final few corpses, the ground once again became stable under our feet. I couldn't hold back any longer. My stomach flipped, sending out hot bile spilling out from between my lips. Bent double, and still leaning against the faded paint of the walls, I emptied the meager contents of my stomach onto the grimy, tiled floor. I felt a solitary hand against my back, a futile attempt from Noah to calm my nerves, but he knew better than to speak. There were no words to console any of us by this point. Now all that seemed to stand between us and our freedom was one single door. Morgan tried the grubby metal handle. The thing rattled but wouldn't budge. He became erratic, trying with all his might to pry the handle open, eventually slamming a fist into the thick, reinforced plastic. Morgan, look! Noah directed his torch into a small rectangular object that was fixed to the wall near the door itself. It was a card reader. At once we turned back towards the mass of bodies, realizing with horror that we need to be forced to go through it again.
One of them has to have it. One of them has to have the goddamn keycard. All we have to do is find it. Simple.
I'm not so sure who Morgan was trying to reassure, us or himself. And so it began. We retraced our steps among the stinking, skeletal remains, rummaging through camouflaged combat jackets stained black with decay. It was filthy work. We coughed and spat, trying to rid ourselves of an odor so foul we could almost taste it.
Check their ranks. If any of these poor bastards has the keycard, it's an officer.
Morgan rasped, and his voice was straining from the effort. Holy crap, you guys, check it out! Noah exclaimed, pulling an old revolver from the remains of one of the dead. He snapped the chamber open, revealing 3 unfired bullets out of the possible 6. With the expertise of a frontier cowboy, Noah freed the empty shells from the chambers, spun the revolver cylinder, and snapped it back into place. This might just save our lives, man, for real. I almost cried out in joy when I spied a symbol on one of the uniforms that contrasted to the others. A singular star shape instead of the usual chevrons. Enthusiastically, rummaging through the dead man's jacket, I think I almost wept when I felt the distinct regular shape of a plastic keycard. Got it! I held the small piece of plastic above my head, a trophy that made every high school hockey medal seem worthless in comparison. You magnificent bastard. I could kiss you.
Here, mate. Lash it over.
Morgan said, a wide, hopeful smile on his face. We were elated. We felt like survivors, like we could get through anything. But we were wrong to feel like that. Wrong to celebrate prematurely. Oblivious to the nightmares that awaited us on the other side of that locked door. Morgan started to look nervous as he began to examine the keycard. The plain, white plastic bore nothing but the metallic information strip. No details, no information. There was nothing to indicate this was even the correct key.
Please work. Please, God, just bloody work for us.
Morgan hissed, reaching slowly to place the keycard into the reader's receiver. For a second, all our hopes hinged on this one single action. He swiped the card. Silence. He swiped again. Still nothing. Oh no. Oh no, why did we think that would work? Noah's voice was frantic as he began to hyperventilate. This freaking shithole hasn't had power in 20 years. The freaking door runs on electricity. Of course it freaking does. We're stuck, man. We're freaking trapped here in this freaking crypt with that goddamned abomination out there waiting for us. Noah, look at me, buddy. Look at me. Just calm down. Calm down? You want me to freaking calm down? You know what the last thing I said to my mom was? Well, it wasn't freaking nice. I'll tell you that much. And that's how she's going to remember me. As some bratty freaking teenager instead of... This hit me hard. I too remember the last thing I said to my dad. How I'd just do just about anything for a chance to get a proper goodbye with him. Yet as I tried in vain to console the almost hysterical Noah, Morgan took a moment to think, flipped the keycard around in his fingers, and tried swiping it another way. We were instantly silenced by a loud, buzzing sound. A small green light on the card reader, shining out in the darkness. Silently, we watched as Morgan once again took a hold of the heavy door handle and pushed it open, revealing the unfathomable horrors within. At first, it wasn't entirely obvious that the function of the locked room was. That was until our torch beams began to wander around the chaotically messy interior. Bell jars, filled with murky fluid, containing shapes too unfamiliar to recognize. Expensive-looking equipment that had some unrecognizable purpose. Test tubes, beakers, syringes of every size. It was a laboratory. What are... Noah was lost for words, completely dumbstruck as the light of his torch traced its way along a line of specimen-filled jars, the formaldehyde in the fluid giving the jars an ominous green tinge. Rats, guinea pigs. It was impossible to tell what the species were, the origins of these monstrosities. They were hideously deformed, mutated beyond all recognition. They soon joined Noah, staring at horrified things in silence. At the rows of twisted, broken creatures as their tiny jaws hung open, frozen in their final moments of pain and confusion. Holy crap, dude, look! Noah's torch darted over to one particular specimen. Its light jittering on the wall as his torch shook from pure fear taking over his body. It looks almost like... I know. My voice dry with terror. They created that thing here. Didn't they? That thing that chased us.
However that thing came to be, the people that ran this facility spent their final moments trying to kill it. Now, help me find a way out of this goddamn room.
The laboratory had no obvious exits, save the door we entered by. But there was one thing, another lone card reader built into one of the bare walls. One by one, after finding no evident means of escape, we centered on the card reader. Morgan held the plastic key card in his grip once again, sliding it through the card reader as we watched the small, green light flicker on. A huge rush of air sounded, causing each of us to panic as the laboratory began to faintly vibrate. We waited for a moment, half expecting the room to fill with poison gas or for some sci-fi self-destruct sequence to activate. But only a few seconds later, a large wall panel began to sink backwards, shifting sideways to reveal a secret passageway bathed in darkness. Once again, Morgan was the first to step foot into the unknown, leading us down the cramped, narrow passage. As we began to reach the end, I could hear our footsteps echoing around a large, open room. Surely escape was close. It had to be. But what greeted us at the corridor widened out into a huge, atrium-style room is something that drove me to the brink of sanity. In the center of the large, empty hall sat a huge obsidian monolith, so intensely black that it seemed to absorb the light of our torches. It must have stretched up into the air for almost 50 feet, dwarfing us as we approached the dark textured surface. What the? Noah whispered under his breath, reaching out with a shaking, curious hand to touch the mysterious object.
No, don't touch it. I mean, we have no idea what this thing is, do we? Jesus Christ, just look at it. It's beautiful.
But what is this thing? It's like nothing I've ever seen before, Noah echoed, withdrawing his fingers from the surface of the monolith.
See those symbols? These are druidic runes, belonging to a tongue that was archaic even to the ancient druids. It's not out of the question that it'd be the oldest written language on Earth.
Morgan pointed towards a series of tiny engravings. It dawned on me at this point that almost the entirety of the huge, obsidian tablet was covered in these tiny, runic engravings. Symbols so tiny and intricate that it was baffling to me how such an ancient people could have managed to create such a sophisticated work. I really don't like this, man. We should be looking for a way out of here, not fawning over this prehistoric freak show. Noah began to grow erratic again, shining his torch around the large hall until his torch beam settled on what appeared to be a ventilation duct. Bingo! His eyes lit up as he rushed over to the metal grate. Setting his torch down before hooking his fingers into the grill, he strained for a second, feeling the thin metal begin to cut into the flesh of his fingers. Then drew his hand away with a grimace. Ah, a little help, guys? Morgan and I threw our gloves on, watching as Noah followed suit, cursing himself for not thinking to do so. None of us would be making it out of here if we had sliced up fingers. Okay. 3, 2, 1, pull! We grunted and strained in unison, pulling on the ventilation grate with all our might before it finally dislodged with an ear-splitting, metallic screech. Noah immediately lowered his head towards the darkened opening, inspecting the arterial tunnel with his anxious eyes. "You not going in there, are you?" I asked him, unable to believe he was contemplating such a thing. I've never been good with enclosed spaces. "You got a better idea?" he responded, squeezing himself into the narrow vent. "Let me just check it out. If it's nothing, well, at least we tried." It took mere moments before he called back. Guys, I see light. I think this leads up to the surface. Noah's ecstatic voice echoed back towards us. And you're sure we can all fit in there? Yeah, man, it's a little cramped, but it's a way out, isn't it?
He's right. This could be our only chance. If that thing we saw in the woods is watching the bunker's entrance, this might actually be the only way for us to make it out alive.
My heart was in my mouth as I squeezed myself into the tiny, tomb-like ventilation shaft. It was intently uncomfortable. I felt trapped, my palms sweating as my pulse began to quicken. With Morgan in front of me, we crawled along the freezing steel of the tunnel, worming our way through what seemed like a mile of the damn thing before the shaft began to jerk upwards, back towards the surface. I felt like short of breath, like we were running out of oxygen, but the deeper the breaths I took, the less I felt like I continued to squeeze along the vent. Morgan, I wheezed, feeling more panicked with every passing moment. Morgan, I think I'm stuck.
Keep pushing, mate. We're nearly there. Curry and beers are on me tonight. We just have to keep going a little bit further.
He tried to reply in his typically casual manner, but I could hear the distress. It was thick in his voice. No, really, the edges of my vision are becoming a fuzzy white. I felt like I'd pass out any moment. I'm stuck, dude. I can't breathe. I'm gonna pass out. I can't freaking breathe. You gotta freaking help.
Calm the fuck down. You're having a panic attack. Just breathe. You're gonna be okay. Everything is gonna be okay, I promise. You'll see. You'll see how all this was worth it. Just keep bloody going, man. Come on.
Morgan's voice cut through the panic. I tried to focus on the sound of Noah bashing his gloved fist against the surface grate, feeling the wave of relief washing over me as with one final effort, he smashed through the rusted metal grate from its moonings. There you go, son of a bitch. He sounded jubilant, euphoric. I never forget crawling towards the light, seeing his gloved hand reaching down to greet me. It was over. Finally, we were safe. As I climbed out, Noah was already switching on the burner cell phone, the sole source of our hope for survival. He punched the air with delight when he saw that despite the cold, it still had a full charge on the battery. Yet, his face quickly dropped again once he saw the lack of signal bars in the top left of the small, monochrome screen. Come on, this freaking thing, he growled, raising the phone high above his head as it searched for a signal. Come on, work, please, God, just... Yes, there we go, that's my girl. Thank God, we had bars. But just as Noah began to punch in the emergency dialing code, just as we were about to make our way for freedom, we heard something that made us feel sick with despair. That same familiar howl, echoing through the trees. Oh crap, I hissed, spasms of fear sending agony through my guts. It's heard us, it's coming. With a beastly, terrifying speed, it was upon us, charging through the trees, ripping branches from bark with violence of its movement. Noah, use the freaking gun on it! Shoot it! I screamed, feeling the front of my pants growing warm and wet. Noah pulled out the old six-shooter from his waistband, cocking the hammer and aiming it squarely at the rampaging beast. It halted, just feet from us, but not at the sight of the gun. Its eyes, its many, many eyes, all differing in size and shape, were all fixed on just one of us, Morgan. Shoot it, Noah! Frickin' shoot it! I continued to scream, but he didn't. With absolutely soul-shattering horror and dismay, I watched as the last few dregs of Noah's sanity slipped away before my very eyes. He shook uncontrollably, the grip on the grubby old revolver going limp. At once, Morgan jumped into action, wrestling the revolver from his grip, frantically trying to pull the weapon from his friend's impotent hands in a last, desperate attempt to save our lives. Suddenly he had it. Morgan raised the revolver in his shaking hands, aimed it, and fired. The sound of the shot echoed around the deserted forest around us. the sound reverberating off the trees until it was swallowed up by the forest. Noah fell. Blood trickled from a single hole in his forehead as his brains showered the forest floor behind him. Only then did Morgan turn back towards the stationary abomination, taking a few shaky steps toward it. As it studied him with its countless, gelatinous eyes, the previously furious creature let out a deep, otherworldly groan of what seemed like sadness.
Father, I am here at last,
Morgan said finally, the word eating away at my sanity as it bore into my brain. With that, Morgan turned to me, bringing the revolver's iron grip smashing into my skull. For the second time that day, my world has plunged into darkness.